Glory to Jesus Christ, and welcome to this week's episode of God with Us Live. Every week, we're joined by men and women, monastics, clergy, and laity, exploring exciting and inspiring ways to live our Eastern Catholic faith today. Your host is Father Deacon Nick Medelsky, a husband, father, and deacon of the Ukrainian Catholic Eparchy of St. Nicholas. And now, here's Father Deacon Nick.
Hello and welcome once again, God with Us Live listeners. Father Deacon Nick Medelsky, excited as always to be here with you to find out more wonderful things going on in our Eastern Catholic churches. Always wonderful to find out more. This week, I'm very excited about our guest for a twofold reason. We've been trying to emphasize that just as God with Us Online, our wider apostolate tries to emphasize this is a catechetical apostolate, not just for Byzantine churches, but for all Eastern Catholic churches here in the United States. And so it's always nice to be able to feature more than just Byzantines, even though obviously the Ukrainian Catholic, I'm familiar with Ukrainian Catholics and Byzantines. It's nice to feature people from the different churches that are present here in the United States and doing a lot of exciting things here, as well as around the world. So my guest today is going to be our first guest that we've ever had from the Syro-Malankara Church, and I'm going to let Father introduce himself. So welcome to the show, Father.
Thank you so much, Father Deacon. If you want me to introduce myself, I'm Father Mathew. I'm a Syro-Malankara Catholic priest, currently serving as the pastor in a Syro-Malankara Catholic Church in Chicago. I'm also the eparchial director for our youth movement, I'm also the translator of our liturgies to English, and currently also working on a doctorate in youth ministry.
Fantastic. Thank you once again for coming on the show. Would you mind telling our listeners, I always like to ask clergy and monastics this question, but could you tell us a little bit about how you discerned your call to the priesthood?
Sure. I mean, there was no thunderbolt or lightning, so it's a fairly boring story, I would think. But I was a severe asthmatic, from the time I was about 2 to around age 10. So I spent a lot of time, being sick and being in bed, to the point that my mom had to sit by my bed overnight to see if I still had a pulse, if I was still alive. So my vocation literally grew out of that silence. When tomorrow is not guaranteed, you get a lot closer to God. So what happened is that, I basically told God, if I make it, tomorrow, let me use what you have given me for you. And that became a desire to priesthood, and, that still silent voice pulled me to priesthood, every day after that. And it became very clear later on.
And then you mentioned a little bit about being involved with not only the youth movement, which of course we'll get to kind of in the second half of the show, but also translating liturgies into English. And I guess would you tell us a little bit about how you got into that, how that started, and how that's going?
So before I say that, I have to preface it by saying that in the Syro-Malankara Catholic Church in the U.S. is a fairly new entity. We only been an eparchy, diocese, since 2015. So it's a very infant eparchy, let's say. So because of that, we have to do everything from scratch. That includes the translation of liturgies, and that started when my bishop asked me to translate funeral rites back in 2015, and from then on I kind of took it upon myself to translate all the liturgies that were not translated to English. So it's been an ongoing work. It's been taking up a lot of time, but the fruits have been worth it.
And did you have any experience translating texts like that before, or is this something that just because it needed to be done, you were the one who got picked to do it?
Yeah, it came out of a necessity, but I think being fluent in my native language, Malayalam, and also having enough of a familiarity with West Syriac, our liturgical language, gave me kind of the competence to do that. So yeah, I mean, doing it, day after day for years, it kind of makes you somewhat of I don't want to say expert, but competent.
So that's true though, because the liturgy was in one language originally, right, and then
Right,
translated into Malayalam and then
right,
into English. So it's kind of like
right.
three steps, right?
Yeah. And a lot gets lost in translation too, sadly, but at least, our children and youth who don't know Malayalam or English can understand at least somewhat of what's going on, even if it is missing quite a bit of the original nuance of the language and the poetry and the significance of the words used.
Very interesting, very interesting, and I appreciate that work because I know there's certain texts for us as Ukrainian Catholics that we don't have an official English translation, so we kind of
Right.
have to piece together from what we can find. So, it's very very important work you're doing. So I
Thank you.
appreciate that for on behalf of the people in your churches. I appreciate that for them. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, outside of getting drafted into uh, translations, what has kind of surprised you, I guess, about being a priest? Right, you were ordained. I think it said 2016. So,
16, yeah, so it's been 7.5 years.
so what's kind of been the maybe surprising or maybe the most rewarding, I guess, part of being a priest so far?
I think the most surprising thing that still hasn't gone away is that in certain points or moments of each day, I think to myself, wow, I am a priest. that 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 shock still hasn't worn off. And it's amazing because I keep asking myself, how am I a priest? Like I'm so unworthy for this. I'm not, in the eyes of the world, I'm not good at anything, but God deemed me good enough to be His priest. The greatest dignity a human being can have. So that's one of the things that shocks me almost daily. On top of that, another thing that shocks me is how unpredictable a life of a priest is, because every day you get up, it's a new set of challenges, it's a new set of issues that you have to deal with and you have to find a solution to on behalf of the people. So that every day is an adventure as a priest. So that's something that's also surprising, and also how much you are part of the families and how welcoming they are and how invaluable they see you as a priest. So all of that is very, very much, I'm unworthy of any of these great gifts that God has given me, but living that out is it's very fulfilling, I have to say. I'm very glad to say that in the last 7.5 years of priesthood, I have never for a second regretted or resented being a priest, with all the sacrifices that come with it. So it's been a ride, and it's been a good one.
So I guess we've gotten to this part in the interview where it would make sense to kind of introduce our listeners to the Syro-Malankara Church, especially those who aren't familiar. As I kind of mentioned before, a lot of our listeners are probably familiar with the Byzantine churches, Ukrainian Catholic, Ruthenian, Melkite, but the Syro-Malankara, as you mentioned, right, is still fairly new comparatively here in the United States, and so it's probably unfamiliar to a lot of people, other than, like I said, maybe some videos online or some articles online or something like that. So would you mind kind of explaining? I know, which is a hard thing to do, because I know it's always difficult for me when people are like, "Oh, Ukrainian Catholic, what's that?" And I have to condense centuries of
Right,
history and
two
traditions and
thousand
everything
years into
down
2 minutes.
into in a few minutes, right? So but if you could do your best at kind of giving us a little introduction there to what the Syro-Malankara Church is.
Okay, so I'll try to keep this as concise as possible, explaining a 2,000-year-old history. But basically, the Syro-Malankara Church traces its spiritual patrimony to Saint Thomas the Apostle, who came to India after Pentecost in AD 52. He was a missionary to different parts of India, and he was martyred in AD 72. So there has been a Catholic presence in India since the 1st century. And that church had been helped by the Persian missionaries until the 16th century when the Portuguese missionaries came. And the Portuguese missionaries saw that there was a Catholic presence, but they were unfamiliar with what it was, so they tried to Latinize it. And one of the steps to doing that was blocking out the influence of the Persian bishops, and there were no native bishops at that time in India, so the Persian bishops were all the bishops that there were. And once this Latinization kind of progressed, people started to get very much insulted, let's say, and they, in 1653, in what's known as the Coon and Cross Oath, they vowed never to have any kind of affiliation with the Fathers of St. Paul, which was St. Paul was the house of the Jesuit missionaries in Kerala. So what inadvertently happened was that this group that split off lost its connection with the Catholic Church, its communion with the Catholic Church, because it doesn't have a bishop. In order to get valid ordinations and to have a bishop, this new group that split off from the existing Catholic group, which by the way became the modern Syro-Malabar Church with its Latinized liturgy. So this new group wrote to different churches to get bishops, and finally a bishop, I believe his name was Mar Gregorius or Gregory, answered, but he was a Jacobite bishop. So he said, I will give you bishops, I'll give you valid ordination, but you have to accept our liturgy. So the liturgy that was there was East Syriac or Chaldean liturgy, which is still used by the Syro-Malabar and Chaldean churches. And this new bishop gave the Antiochian liturgy to the new group. And it still remained split apart from the Catholic communion, so there were many efforts to reunite with the Catholic Church. That came into fulfillment in 1930 when Archbishop Mar Ivanios was given the charge to reunite with the Catholic Church, and his attempt succeeded. The plan was for the entire church, what's known as the Orthodox Church, which was split apart again from the Jacobite Church, to reunite with the Catholic Church. And I know it's getting complicated, but because of winning a case, many of the bishops backed out. But Mar Ivanios and another bishop, along with 3 other people, came into communion with the Catholic Church in 1930. So, to put it very shortly, Syro-Malankara Catholic Church is an Eastern Rite Catholic Church that reunited with the Catholic Church in 1930, but uses the Antiochian liturgy, which is the first liturgy, St. James liturgy that was ever used. So it is both young and old at the same time.
Very fascinating, and yeah.
Very much complicated.
And that Mar Ivanios that you mentioned, he was recently declared venerable by Pope Francis,
yes,
correct? Yeah.
Yes, a couple of days ago, actually, on the 14th.
Yeah, so very, very interesting figure in the history of your church, and I think interesting for a lot of people to hear that, just like you said, since the 1930s. So really kind of a newly re-entering into communion church, really kind of a young, like you said, very young but very old at the same time.
Yeah, and one of the I mean, it has, again, very much in common with the Eastern Rite churches and liturgies. It's very symbolic, ornate, musical. Scripture is infused in every single hymn and prayer, and it has its own hierarchy. And one of the things to note is that Pope St. John Paul II of happy memory, he called it one of the fastest growing churches in the world. So that is quite a distinction that we can claim.
And is that from people from the Orthodox Church coming into communion with Rome? Is that missionary work? Is it just people having children? What
It's a combination of all of that. We actually have one diocese in India that is mostly, I would say like 97% made of converts to Catholicism through the Syro-Malankara Church. So yeah, so we have, it's a mix of, missionary work. It's a work of, people giving birth, and, even the Orthodox and the Protestants and even the atheists coming back to the fold, and also, Hindus and Muslims too. But the problem is that the actual number of Christians in India, we always say it's 2 to 3%, but it is only so because many people don't want to lose their benefits that would come from not being Christian. So they wouldn't identify themselves as Christian on a census paper, but they would be practicing as Christians because there's enough persecution going on in India that they don't want to risk their family or their benefits.
Could you talk, if you wouldn't mind, could you talk a little bit more about that, how that, the state of Christians in India and what kind of that persecution looks like?
It's so the recent persecutions have been very much political oriented, where the extremist people of certain religions have been, trying to demolish churches, trying to persecute the people, in terms of even causing problems that began from the opposite side and blaming the Christians for it. So there's plenty on the news about it. I don't want to go too much into it.
Right.
Yeah. There's enough issues and enough nuances in that. But the bottom line is that Christians are very much being persecuted in India, especially in the northern parts of India. In Kerala, where the Syro-Malankara and Syro-Malabar churches are, we enjoy a more friendly environment because of the number of Christians and Catholics there are in Kerala.
So is Kerala is kind of where most of the Catholics
Yes.
are kind of concentrated?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's also the state with two major archbishops. So Syro-Malabar and Syro-Malankara Catholic Church both have its, let's say, the headquarters in Kerala, in that one state.
Oh, wow. And are there Roman Catholics as well?
Yes.
area
Roman,
too?
right?
Oh, wow.
There's a very good percentage of Roman Catholics. It's the Syro-Malankara Catholics that's the tiniest portion. Everybody else is much bigger. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, that's fascinating, and thank you. Like I said, I know it's difficult, but I think you did a good job there of giving people a picture there of a church that's very ancient roots, but very new as well in some ways. And we're going to be talking more about that, especially about the Syro-Malankara Church and how it is here in the United States, as well as the Catholic Youth Movement that we talked about and mentioned at the start of the show. And we'll talk about those right after a quick break to learn about our Saint of the Week. So stay tuned.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Scenes with the Saints. Do you know which saint has a variety of mango named after him? Saint Kyriakos Elias Chavra was born into a Syro-Malabar Catholic family in Kerala, India in 1805. After a fairly ordinary childhood, Saint Kyriakos was ordained a priest, and shortly afterwards joined with two other priests to form a monastic community called the Servants of Mary Immaculate. Their community became affiliated with the Third Order Discalced Carmelites, and Kyriakos became the prior of their growing monastery. Eventually, the congregation came to be known as the Carmelites of Mary Immaculate, and St. Kyriakos became the common prior in charge of all of the monasteries of these Carmelites. St. Kyriakos also wrote a great many works about Syro-Malabar spirituality, philosophy, and liturgy, as well as literature and drama and the Malayalam language. St. Kyriakos also led many social reforms in the state of Kerala, including founding schools to teach the lower castes of Indian society, the so-called untouchables. He went so far as to convince his bishop to issue a decree ordering all members of his parishes to found schools or face excommunication. St. Kyriakos sent the members of his order out to ensure that these schools would be set up properly. However, St. Kyriakos knew that having good teachers in a school were not all that students needed in order to learn. He knew that the poor children would often struggle to learn their lessons, when all they could think about was how hungry they were. He insisted that these children would be given a nice warm meal for lunch every day to keep them learning in school. But how was he going to do this, especially in areas where his families were struggling to keep food on their own tables? St. Kyriakos came up with a rather ingenious plan. Instead of asking for large donations of food or money, he simply asked families to set aside a small amount of uncooked rice in a special pot every day during the week. At the end of the week, the families would bring their contributions of rice together to church, and the collected rice would be used to feed the students and other hungry people. Another project that St. Kyriakos is famous for, at least in his native India, is a mango tree that he planted. He tended the tree from a seedling, and when he tasted the sweet fruit it produced, he sent seedlings from the tree to all of the other monasteries and convents of his order. He told them to plant these trees and to care for them, not only because their fruit was delicious, but also as a reminder that myself and all men are weak and faltering and don't have long life, even as these mango trees which give sweet fruits. He hoped that these mango seedlings would leave a loving patrimonial memory. This mango tree is still known in India today as prior mangoes after St. Kyriakos, and they are exported to all other parts of India and renowned for their exceptional flavor. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Scenes with the Saints. Join us again next time when we learn more about the lives of these holy men and women.
Well, hello again, and welcome back, God with Us Live listeners. Once again, Father Deacon Nick Medelsky here with you, and we're speaking with Father Jerry Mathew, who's a priest of the Syro-Malankara Church in Chicago. And before the break, we were talking a little bit about Father Jerry, about his path to the priesthood, as well as the Syro-Malankara Church and its rich history, like that quotation from St. Augustine, ever ancient, ever new. A lot of ancient roots and a lot of newness as well to that church. And part of that newness, as we mentioned at the start, as you said, only since 2015 has there been any kind of hierarchical structure here in the United States for the Syro-Malankara Church. Would you mind telling us a little bit about just the history of the Syro-Malankara Church here in the United States, how that kind of started, and what kind of the current state is, I guess you could say, of the Syro-Malankara Church here in the United States?
Sure. So it started with the number of immigrants coming from India, especially from Kerala to US, and that really started in the 1960s when the permission was given for the Indians to start migrating even more than usual, skilled workers and everyone. So we got a lot of nurses and people in healthcare and other areas come into US and establish themselves in major cities. So these cities were New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, and Houston and Dallas. So because the mind of people, especially from India, is that first, before they even have a home, their mind is set on having a church. So they want to establish themselves and their identity around that church. So in Chicago, that was one of the first communities that formed. There was what's called a Catholic fellowship where all the Catholics, Syro-Malabar, Syro-Malankara, and Roman Rite Catholics come together as Catholics for prayer meetings, and whenever a priest was present in any of the three rites, they would come together and celebrate Mass or Kurbono. And as time went on, each of the rites started to get their own priest. They started to expand, so that Catholic fellowship kind of fell away and gave rise to individual churches in those individual rites. With the Syro-Malankara Catholic Church in the US, the official inauguration of our what's called the Syro-Malankara Mission was in 1984 in New York. But even by 1983, we had a community, Malankara community here in Chicago. And I believe it was in 2001 that the Malankara Catholic community in US was given an apostolic visitator. So he was, directly under the Pope. He was answerable to the Pope directly. And later on, we became an exarchate in 2010 and an eparchy in 2015. So it's a very short history of the Syro-Malankara Catholic Church here. And many of the challenges that we have is because of how young and new it is.
And do you find are there people who are not Indian who are interested in the Syro-Malankara as well, or is it mostly kind of an ethnic church at the moment?
At the moment, it is about 99% ethnic, but we do have people come in and enjoy the celebration of liturgies. Most of them are, Roman Rite Catholics who want to know what an Eastern liturgy is, how it looks, how it sounds. And they come for that. But in terms of permanent members, it's from, they come through marriages mostly. And we also have, I believe, one person in one of the parishes who became Malankara Catholic from being a Roman Catholic. So it is mostly an ethnic church still, but that is not something that we envision being like that in the future. I mean,
right, obviously.
It will be the death of us if it remains ethnic church.
Well, fascinating. It's always interesting to know about the different Eastern Catholic churches, and that's the same with most of the Eastern Catholic churches, where they start out with kind of that ethnic population, and then once we get more established here in the United States, then different people are able to discover us and find out more about us, and especially with your translation work into English, I'm sure that's helping people as well who
I
are not
really
from
hope
that
so.
background. Right?
I'm spending a lot of time and energy on it, and missing a lot of sleep. But I'm hoping it's worth it.
So is at the moment, is it still the parishes are kind of limited to those few areas you mentioned at the start: New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, and Texas there, Houston and Dallas? Is that kind of it?
That's where our bigger parishes are, but we have expanded. We even have parishes in California, and we have missions in Atlanta. It's throughout the continent, but most of the bigger parishes, and when I say bigger, I'm talking just over 100 families. That's big for us. Those exist mostly in New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, Houston, Dallas, in those areas. We also have parishes and missions in Canada too, because the eparchy is it covers both the US and Canada.
Ah, okay. Well, that's interesting to know too.
It's a huge territory, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the other things we mentioned right at the start is your involvement with youth work, and I think that kind of makes a logical sense to move to that kind of train of thought, because we're talking about the church growing and flourishing here in the United States and kind of the future of the church here in the United States. So I think it makes sense to talk about the Malankara Catholic Youth Movement. Could you tell us a little bit about what that is and what your involvement with that is?
So the Malankara Catholic Youth Movement, or MCYM, it is the official youth wing of the Malankara Catholic Church. It began in India in the late 1960s, became official in 1971. Basically, it focuses on the development of spirituality and faith in the youth, while also giving them formation in intellectual, social, and other areas, cultural areas, political areas. So that's what the original purpose of MCYM is. But in the United States, we focus mostly on the spiritual, intellectual, and social development of the youth. So it is through the MCYM that we give this formation to the youth, whether it is through conferences, through retreats, through camps, things like that, while also having this social dimension through food drives, toy drives, charity works, um, helping where there is whether there's a natural disaster, things like that. So it kind of combines both the spiritual and the practical aspects of faith.
And how did you get involved with that? I know you mentioned you're actually working on a doctorate in youth ministry or youth outreach or something like that. I can't remember the exact term, but how did that interest come up for you?
So I mean, any Malankara Catholic who goes to church would automatically be part of the MCYM. So I grew up as a member of the MCYM. That's in my blood, so to speak. With the youth ministry doctorate, it wasn't meant to be. I wasn't sent to Rome, so I'm doing my doctorate in Rome. So I wasn't sent to Rome for a youth ministry doctorate. I was sent to Rome to get a licentiate in catechism. But when I reached out to them about admission and everything, they said, you can have a licentiate, that's going to be 2 years. But before that, you had to take a Bachelor of Education, that's going to be another 4 years. So I told my bishop that, and he said, no, we don't have that kind of time for you to be away from the country. So he said, look into what is possible, and youth ministry was there. So that's, and it all kind of, the puzzle pieces fell into place because I was already the director of the youth ministry of the eparchy. So bishop said, okay, go for the youth ministry licentiate, and that took 2 years. And I still remember this. 15 hours after I finished the thesis, he called me and said, Jerry, I want you to go for doctorate to Rome. And I told my bishop, I really don't want to do this, but if you insist, I will do it. And he said, Jerry, I insist. You have to go. So I went. So I spent 1 more year in Rome, did my classes for doctorate, finished the progetto, or the project of the doctorate, and then bishop called me back. So I'm continuing writing, researching, and doing my doctorate as I serve as the pastor and also director of MCYM and everything else.
Wow, I have no idea how you have the time for all this.
I do, but that saying, but for the grace of God go I. That's me.
There you go. Oh, wow. So did for your seminary, did you do that in Rome as well, or
No,
how did that work? Okay.
So I joined after I took a bachelor's in psychology from Oakland University in Michigan. After that, I joined the seminary, and I was supposed to join in US, but my bishop said, no, Jerry, you go to India. So I went to India. It's long story short, I spent 3 years there, the most fruitful 3 years of formation that I've had. And 3 years there, 1 year in minor seminary, 2 years in philosophy, then 4 months I served as a regent in psychosocial rehabilitation home, serving the mentally ill.
Oh, wow.
That's really where where I recognized and realized that this is my vocation, to love and serve the lowest of the lowest people in the world, people who even the society doesn't want, but God wants. So that's where my vocation really strengthened and got established. So that's 3 years of seminary in India. Then I came back to US for 4 years of seminary at St. Joseph's Dunwoody Seminary in New York, Yonkers, New York. So I did my theology there, and that's where I got the best academic formation by some of the most brilliant teachers I've ever met, brilliant human beings I ever met. So I got the best of both worlds. I got, philosophy from India, which covered also Western philosophy, then brought to US, where I got the best of theology, then sent to Rome for additional studies. So apparently one place wasn't enough for me to get what I wanted, so God sent me everywhere.
Quite the experience, and
it's quite the journey. Yeah, this is why I wake up every day and I ask myself how am I a priest? This does not happen through human means or human thought. there's something definitely going on here. So it's definitely God.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, fantastic. It's been a pleasure to talk to you today, Father Jerry, and find out about you and about the Syro-Malankara Church. It's a really fascinating. For any of our listeners who are listening, we mentioned sometimes people would just like to attend Curbano just to see what it's like and kind of find out a little bit more. Does your parish have a website? Is people find out more information on coming to visit, that sort of thing?
Yes, so all of our Malankara parishes have their own website, but if you want to go to the Eparchy website, it's mccna.org. mccna.org, and you can go there and get the details of which parish is closest to you in the US or in Canada, and also the times of liturgies there. If you want to learn more about the liturgy and especially the Holy Curbano, I actually have a lectures or a homily series, divided into 5 parts on YouTube. So if you look up, I believe it is a Holy Curbano Explained, it will come up, and it's 5 videos, 10 minutes each, in both English and Malayalam. So it's not even 10 minutes. So that can give a basic overview and details of what happens in the Holy Curbano, what the meanings of different symbols are, the important points of the Holy Curbano, all of that. So it gives you a overall exposure to it.
Well, fantastic. And once again, that website is mccna.org. I assume for Malankara Catholic
Church, North America.
North America. Yeah, exactly. So we'll make sure to also have that link in the description for the podcast as well, and a link to that YouTube series as well. Because as I was mentioning during the break, I had looked up that YouTube series and thought, see, here's a priest who can explain things, who actually cares about explaining things, who's got a good way with words and everything. So that's how I came upon Father Jerry, partially to invite you on for this interview. So very cool, and we definitely recommend to our listeners to check that out. Well, once again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Father Deacon. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you, and an honor. Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in to listen today here on God With Us Live. Always a pleasure to have great conversations and be able to share them with you about our beautiful Eastern Catholic churches. God bless.
Joining us for this week's episode of God With Us Live. Make sure to tell a friend or two about us and subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Don't forget to follow God With Us online on Facebook and Instagram for even more great content about the Eastern Catholic churches. And don't forget to check out all the other great Eastern Catholic podcasts at godwithusradio.org, where faith meets life. God With Us Live is a production of God With Us Radio, hosted, produced, and edited by Nick Modelski. Send us a message at info@godwithusradio.org.